Hey folks, welcome back. As you can see, today we are diving into the revised edition of the Somnia Tarot and the Oracle series. I recently received these after backing them last year, I want to say, at some point. I really don't remember when the Kickstarter was. I thought it would be fun to not just show off these two together, but actually to dive into some playing with pairs. Very off the cusp. I haven't prepared too much for this at all, other than to write down everything that I thought of on a list, get it all out, and then as I was unboxing them, I did see a couple and get an immediate no from them. In a recent fall autumn deck edit, I actually mentioned a few decks that I would pair with this throughout the month, and I'm going to continue to do so. You're going to see at least one of them in this pairings video, but check that out if you want some more ideas. I will talk really briefly about these two, but there are going to be a lot of comparison videos, and I haven't owned this one for very long at all. I really wanted to get this video done sort of from more of a raw perspective before diving into using it. I did have some strong initial thoughts. I might talk about some of them very briefly, but I'm actually going to temper them, fill them out, give them some time to develop after I've spent enough time with this deck as well, because that feels more fair. So let's dive into this. So very quickly, just in case this is the first video that you are watching on these and you're just thinking, damn, show us a comparison. The boxes are sort of same but pretty different in terms of what style boxes they are. This one is a two-piece. It doesn't have the cutouts, but it does the job. It comes apart really well. It protects the deck well. I've had no issues with it. This one is, I guess, what you would refer to as quite a bit fancier. It has a magnetic box that thankfully opens all the way up. It's got all this gold foiling, so it's kind of been snazzed up. As for the guidebooks, this is one of two of the biggest changes. This guidebook is very simple and to the point with a little white book. You could actually buy the nice bendy photographic book, but it does come at the price you would imagine for buying such a high quality art book. And it had more expansions in there, whereas this, the cards get a selection of keywords, and that's kind of the treatment the whole way through. Whereas with this one, from what I can tell from a very quick glance, this has exactly the same information as the photography book that I'm talking about, but obviously in little white book format. This feels like a much more valuable little white book, and you can pause and have a look if you want to read further. I'll open it on one more page. The reason that I like the information in this book is more to do with the discussion about particular objects, intimacies about them, familiarities, those kind of things, discussions about why some of the, I guess, framing was set up, how it was, what's been included and why. So I guess in some ways it's as much a discussion of that as it is what the meanings are. That's kind of more valuable to me, so that's where I'm speaking from. But they are the two books that come in the first edition and the revised edition, which are very clearly labelled, so it would be really hard to get them confused based on the fact that the box says revised edition as well. And then last but not least, before we dive into pairings, here are the two decks together, again the first edition and the second, so you can see significant changes. Very quickly, before I start picking cards up, borders to non-borders, this size is slightly bigger, whereas this is a standard tarot card size. So this is going to feel like your standard Rider-Waite-Smith, your Wild Unknown, those kind of things in terms of sizing, and it does mean that it's far easier. I can just about shuffle this one this way, this one I have to shuffle long ways. Aside from that, visually, this one's got a normal print, this one has like an embossed gold foil, I don't know what it's called, it's snazzy and shiny, and then the finish is different as well. Whilst I would certainly not call this a gloss by any sense of the imagination, this is like a satin matte finish. it's got a little bit of a sheen to it. So it's going to show up more lighting. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you just 2 cards because I don't want to do the whole comparison thing. As you can see, not only are we slightly, just ever so slightly zoomed into the picture, because of course, even though this is smaller, we are getting a enlarged picture where there isn't the border. I am a bit of a border person, I'll be honest. I do think that some decks suit without, and I also think it comes down incredibly to personal taste, and it is absolutely impossible to please everyone. So I would keep that in mind when I'm sharing just the few things that I'm going to say. As I say, I'm not going to say a lot. The saturation, the brightness, the contrast, even the clarity has been changed, adapted, edited in this particular deck. Whilst you are seeing more here, and in some of the cards, that's nice, especially in terms of accessibility, if higher contrasts and things like that are going to help you notice what you're seeing. Thematically, I actually like the softness, the darkness, and the muted tones of the first a little more. And also some cards where this one, I think a lot of people will prefer the full in the 2nd edition or revised. I can kind of understand, I have my preference, but I can see the difference between them. In this one, which is the 4 of Swords, and I have brought it to the front because it's one that I noticed very quickly. What you win with some changes, you lose on others, especially in terms of how much actual photography quality can be translated onto a deck of cards, which must be incredibly challenging. I think that the sharper and the more defined something is, sometimes we lose something, especially with softer backgrounds, but we might gain something in terms of what's up close and that sort of finesse of details. And so that's the thing that's being played with here. And you can notice like a slightly warmer tone throughout this deck as well. Really just find myself being a lot more drawn to this. This is really, really well made. It has shiny edges and gilding, which is another difference that I nearly forgot to mention, whereas this one is just standard on the edges. However, one of the reasons I really wanted to back this, other than wanting to support the artist because I am a huge fan, is because I knew I would be able to shuffle this. Being as I have now backed this instead of getting a 2nd copy of this, which I'm sort of torn about. I wanted the Oracle. I perhaps should have got the Oracle and then a 2nd copy of this. I will now feel like I can take this one out and about with me. So that's always a fun layer. I really don't have much else to add, and I can't compare any more cards because this is obviously not in order, and I really didn't want to do that to my deck. So that's that. They're sort of some of my gentle initial thoughts. I will come back to it when I review this one at a later point. And yeah, hopefully you can take that as I mean it, which is just from my personal opinion. Obviously, these were made to pair together, and as you can see, the Somnia Oracle, which is in the middle, has followed the exact same design and expression as the Somnia Tarot Revised, complete with all the same treatment except the backs are slightly different, which again, different from the 1st edition because they've got this embossing and a changed design. First impressions, absolutely stunning use of archetypes and concepts. There's clearly a lot that is pulled from various like analytical psychologies and expressions of dream theories and approaches within that. So as you can see, the little white book gets the same treatment. And one of the reasons that I really felt like diving into this today as well is because I actually had a really horrible bout of sleep paralysis this morning. I was particularly lucid and it took a longer time to come out of it than usual. It is not a joy at all, and this deck has been a really meaningful visual expression of some of my experiences of sleep paralysis, nightmares, night terrors, and a combination of sort of, I guess, kind of more abstract, surrealist dreams that perhaps aren't as stressful but have some of the other themes woven into them. And it's one of the things that drew me to the deck initially. The fact that the Oracle has followed things that I work with, that I'm familiar with, that I enjoy is a great bonus. The only other thing that I will say, I don't mind that the cards aren't numbered, but they also aren't in alphabetical order. So you will need to use the contents page if you want to find them quickly in the book. As you know, I've not spent that much time with this, so I'm not sure why, but my first thought upon looking at everything that's included in this oracle is actually that the author, creator, wanted to keep them in some form of like subcategories, because actually if you follow along, you can see like the anima and the animus follow after each other, the persona and shadow, the self. If you're familiar with these sort of concepts, then you will see how some of them are grouped, and even some of the other archetypes as you move further down. There is kind of a story that unfolds through sections of them, which is beautiful and powerful and meaningful, a very conscious way to create a collection of concepts, just really not great in terms of being able to utilize the guidebook quickly, which I imagine quite a few people are going to want to do with this one. But being as we didn't give the oracle a proper look through, I just thought I would add some of those things. But that's why I'm so excited about it, because it's my kind of discussion. And of course, because it's all of his photography, they just sing to each other. And I will use them together. I'm kind of curious to see how the oracle matches with the first edition as well. But what I'm aware of is that the colour and the contrast will be quite different. The more complementary tones naturally make these two just the perfect fit for each other. I won't talk about this one too long in particular, because I want to show you some of the, I guess, the personal and then potentially more unusual pairings that you might see. So we'll stop there, which is a really interesting conversation actually, because if you know about the animus, also I don't really like the discussion of feminine and masculine. I don't really like those terms. I don't really align with them in terms of when these were created and perhaps the expression of why it was felt that they were necessary. I do understand some of that conceptually, and of course I understand them in terms of the theory. And so the animus is often discussed as the masculine aspect within the woman. And again, I don't really like to attribute genders to any of the cards, but it is interesting to consider the play of the Empress and the Emperor in terms of their expressions and how the animus might speak to a certain way of bringing those two things together. Just a quick cheeky pairing, not too much of this one, because I have used the Tree Whisper Oracle with the first edition of the Somnia Tarot, so I know how they work together in terms of thematically and I guess somewhat visually, but I really wanted to see them here together, just all of the borderless, see some of the colour play and see if it still worked. I feel like the Tree Whisper is kind of an in-between the two decks in terms of like tonally and saturation. So it looks like it's going to work equally as well. And even though it's trees, because Mags mirrored them in this way, it makes it really surreal and otherworldly. And the meeting of that feels fantastic, along with the fact that the type of, I guess, doorways and invitations through the language chosen on this particular oracle feels really fitting with these. Oh, look at that tree as well, actually. Page of Swords, seeking truth through the High Priestess. It's poetic, and then gratitude harnessed through the Four and the Queen of Swords. So really getting into a Queen of Swords space. And I like that we're seeing the sort of warm tone brought in just at the sides here, and then the rest of it does feel like the Queen's domain visually. I really like these ones together actually. And I think because we could interpret this as both uncovering but also trying to conceal and preparing to hide away, we can then explore what the fear means, and we could consider the Three of Coins either advice, or it could be that once we've gone from this, we're sort of being asked to look at how we would then play out with what we have brought into fruition and what has become a part of our sort of sanctuary, foundation, safety, and whether we are struggling with that and fear has come in to sort of have its say. I decided to just try them with one of the broccoli decks quickly. They are one that I have commonly used with the original version. I thought that the play between the border and knot would also be interesting, and the one that I've opted for is the seashell. There are different cards in each of them, in my opinion, that really match the Somnia in some and then don't in others. I particularly like the themes of the seashell, the mushroom and the celestial, because I think that the themes and a lot of what's in them, aside from perhaps the animals, tend to come up in here. Also, we see a lot of water. We see a lot of sky and this idea of like looking off into the clouds and what's above. And then in terms of the mushroom, it is just the theme in particular. So I just thought we would have a little look-see at these together. The Fool and the Devil, and in between we've got Glory of the Seas, Desire, Singularity and Fame. Well, if you don't need a combination of these two to chase those, then I don't know what you need. And in terms of the colour play here, I'm enjoying it. There are some particularly sort of like colourful cards in these as well, so it's not perhaps always the best visual, as I say. The Knight of Cups, the Nine of Wands between Clam, Happiness, Humility and Quietude, which by the time that I've got to the Nine of Wands, I am desperately seeking that. I am pushing through to come to just a different experience, and I think that the Knight of Cups is a fantastic one for bringing in a little romance and frivolity and perhaps playing around with what happiness feels like again, where the humility might be sort of fostered within the dynamic and the contrast of the fact that we're in the Nine of Wands. So it has humbled us in a way that perhaps we weren't already. And loving the mirroring of the umbrellas in these two in particular, which we don't see them in all the cards. So again, there's that kind of visual layer to enjoy, which we know that I do. Oh, look at this shell, just really bringing in that pentacle and that hermit's lantern. What I would say here is when I'm looking for the visuals and not just the layers of intuition and what I know about the cards, those sort of foundational facets to how I read tarot anyway, whatever the deck. The visual I'm loving here is the fact that we've got the Ace of Wands and you can see the wand on fire, and then we've got the coral and also the figure behind almost embodying both the flame. Look, the flame really looks like it could be this person, perhaps just from a slightly different angle. And the coral is really just, mirroring that fire and the potential of that in particular. And we're seeing it embodied in the Six of Cups, which kind of brings a lot of the body language in here. This back and forth, it brings me into mind of these two figures here. So there's kind of quite a bit of mirroring going on between these in just a really unexpected way. One of my absolute favourite cards. So we've got the Sun and the Tower, which is quite the contrast, in between the Barnacle, which is attachment, strength and home, which is really interesting that those would come up because we have what looks like a doll's house and it's on fire, and look at the attachment between it as an expression for the Tower. And the Sun then speaks to a really interesting expression of strength, in particular if we're going to use all three keywords. A friend of mine had mentioned my beloved Fallen Angels because of the colour tones and things like that, and I agreed straight away. I was very, very curious. Now they're quite different styles still. This is very clean and crisp. This is like collage layered and somewhat like texturally a little bit more chaotic. So it will be interesting to see them in play together, because Fallen Angels is quite the energy, and so is the Somnia Tarot. So it could be one of those ones where I only want to come to it in very specific moments, because this is a deck for particular practices, work-ins for me, whereas some of my others are a lot more general and adaptive. See, and for me, if I was going to work more with the expression of the keywords and get less into the demonology layer that I love to dive into with this deck, but really kind of trying to simplify one of the two a little bit, think about the idea of friendship, then this really has an interesting invitation and expression of like a sadness felt within one, and perhaps being caught in a moment of transition and having questions, discomfort, maybe even some confrontations around that, which is where the Hanged Man is coming in to express that. Now this pairing's making me happy because I wouldn't have used the Fallen Angels with the original version. It might be one of the few instances where the borders get in the way of me feeling like it's speaking to the art. I can really feel the flow of the fire through this one and how much it's picked out, even in the coins. Bit of colour work coming through there as well. That's really interesting. I would read this as a shift. So the rebirth is to move from the King of Coins into the Page of Coins, because there's something that we need to learn or experience from a space where we perhaps are available or identify more as, I'm just going to say student, but I do think it confuses people sometimes to see the pages solely as students. The humility, or perhaps the lack of knowing that we're within a page that isn't always either existent or perhaps just acknowledged and expressed in our kings and queens. Oh, I like those two though. And yes, gonna leave that in, although that was not coherent at all. I was just having a moment. Look at the shapes all coming together and bringing us up to the top of each card. So even though this one is quite a stark contrast in terms of colour, there's that mirroring throughout the three of them. And I like the idea of respite of the mind, and therefore the conception is to actually see the Hierophant as an external source rather than ourselves, because I certainly work with them in both capacities, but I feel like this is really like defining what this Hierophant means in particular. Let's have a look at just one more. I love Stolas. I'm very particularly fond of this one. And we've got recuperation between the 2 and the Ace, which is beautiful. So far, this is actually one of my favourites. Newest edition of Coastal Curiosities, The Naturalist. And because it's more toned down, I wanted to try it with this. It is a very different art style, but it is not always the art that's the director. And it's so different that I'm not feeling that weird, I guess, twitch that I get internally between two slightly different photography styles that aren't quite hitting it. Which is funny because I'm fine with the Fallen Angels and I'm fine with the Broccoli. But as I say, I think it might be a mixture of like the borders and again, just some of the styling. But two very clean photography decks, perhaps not so much. Actually, Lennox also had this deck that came out, which is the Grandmother. And I had originally considered trying it with this. I do think it would work, but it's got a bit of a softer focus and hue, especially because these are expressions of old Polaroids, which is just lovely. So I actually think that it will be a pairing that I tend towards for my first edition of the Somnia in particular. The Coastal Curiosities, it's there in the name. And because of what's gathered together, it is kind of obscure. And it does feel like an expression of what comes up in my dreams, because there are often key items. Now, I don't solely do dream work with this, but I'm just trying to give you an insight into the kind of themes, I guess. And see, to me, and this might not stick out to you, but the top of this pair still reminds me of the top of this wand and the fact that the Magician's holding the candle. So I kind of see obscure things pulled together, and I'm sure it's because I'm looking for familiarity, but that's fine. you know, if it works, it works. I don't need to question too much as to why. So I just thought, in the same way that I use my first edition of the Somnia with my Memento Mori, which again, not similar styles, but the symbolic language speaks really well with the Somnia. And I feel like this is going to do the same thing. Impulse between the Knight of Swords and then the Seven of Cups, which is really interesting because the Seven of Cups is so reflective, the sevens in general for me. I guess hasty reflections lead to hasty decisions. That has come to play because we're in the Knight's energy, which is very impulsive as far as I'm concerned. And whilst it might play off sometimes, other times not so much. Also, how interesting that we have this here again, and we're seeing the ropes here, and then of course the sword. This is an interesting one because they're almost in contradiction of each other. What I will say from this, and the first thought that actually comes to my mind, is that often when working with trauma or challenges to our nervous system, different states of being, many people can actually find it really difficult to be in what we might call a 10 moment, especially a 10 of cups, because it's hard to trust that safe overflow of getting all the way up to the bloom into what is kind of a temporary and somewhat fragile experience, because we know we can't stay in any of these states. But there's something especially tasty about being in this, usually. However, if it's not familiar to us or we worry about how fleeting it is, there is a certain sharpness and an unknown, sort of an expression of then the challenges and some of the residual fear that lies beneath the surface that might come up, which might seem really contradictory to some people. Like, how can you not enjoy being happy? But that is something that I work with people around, is the experience of struggling when feeling happy for a myriad of reasons. So I didn't want to get too heavy, but that is, I'm really liking these two together actually. Oh, foraging for strength and the things that revitalise and rejuvenate us or sort of bolster us in the contraction and the friction of the Five of Wands is another beautiful one. And I find myself sometimes a little less focused on all of the items in the card and more towards one particular item or two, and then the keyword in this particular expression of them. Next up, I have the Citadel Oracle, which might seem a little bit of an odd and almost nonsensical pairing. Stick with me. Some of the themes in the Citadel, even though it has a very sort of tabletop expression, does cross over with archetypal energies, and it's just a really well done deck. I freaking love this Oracle. And the thing is, whilst I think that in some ways it might do something similar to the Somnia Oracle, or even like the Wild Unknown archetypes, which I didn't get out, but actually would work with this as well in terms of thematically. People might think, well, work with the Somnia Oracle then, but you might not have it. And also the difference is actually there is something a little bit energetically lighter about these invitations that perhaps balances out the visual, it breaks it up a bit. So yeah, they're kind of obscure together, but I just got a bit of an idea that I might enjoy them together. I mean, visually, I'm not gonna lie, it's not really doing anything for me. But I do like considering the kings as catalysts. Like, if you've got to that point, if you hold some form of power or leadership, you know, do something with it. The idea of taking control and inciting radical changes, like, yes please, we love that when we're in king. It is interesting that I've got more cups or chalices here, and we've had a cups card come up. the idea of generosity met with naivety, toiling away and giving so much of ourselves and really trying to keep up the momentum, but perhaps feeling like we're at a stasis, which I feel can come up in some of the sevens, could lead us to feel like moving away from something. Or it could also mean that we have perhaps given of ourselves in a way that isn't beneficial anymore, and therefore that's where the naivety comes in. Maybe a discussion around our expectations. Oh, yes, the Pilgrim. Opportunities and growth between the Star and the Queen of Coins. And I love that the light in the lantern looks like the coin. Now there are elements in here as well, and you're going to see some of them will sync up and some of them will not. I don't really pay too much attention to it. I guess what I mean is it's not a massively conscious layer of how I read with this particular deck. Oh, this really brings in like a shadowy facet of these two cards in particular. Also the question, what's forgotten when you get to a certain point? Like, some victories mean that we have unfortunately had to lose something, or we haven't perhaps paid enough attention to something else, and there is a loss within that. And once we've got to a certain point, the invitation is perhaps that is the end. We've come full cycle, and for things not to be entirely forgotten, we may need to start again afresh. Or it could just be that we take a moment to acknowledge the forgotten before moving full circle again. I think that these two are kind of interesting together. Very, very odd visually, but I think I'm managing to focus on the specifics in this one and try and place some of them. So here, with all of the gamblers, we actually have the 10 of coins, which the lure to gamble with our resources when we're at perhaps full capacity with them, or even as myself, like someone who has chronic pain and has to manage my pace and my energy, the lure to not purposefully but also perhaps less consciously grab those moments, run outside with them, and then sort of gamble and maybe pay the price later, but also the acknowledgement that that's kind of the reality of living with those things. So I notice I'm trying to pull these bits and either make a visual distinction or just kind of ignore them and focus on the keywords. We should probably start wrapping this one up in particular. I will very quickly show you the other two decks. I had thought about using my Destiny deck of Whispers. It doesn't get loads of use because there's only like 12 cards, but aside from the sort of gold inclusion, this is quite a thematically confronting deck with some really interesting layers in it. And I feel, again, thematically, more than anything else, this is going to be just the best fit with this deck. So that was my thinking with that one. But as I say, there's not actually many cards to be seen anyway. Visually, they're a little bit of an eyesore together, but if the theme works strong enough, it will override my feelings about it as long as the artwork's quite different. It's almost so different, you know, that it's like quirky. And then I guess I will quickly just change these so we can see two different cards. But what I realised is the Somnia Tarot is one that I like to use with the Weavers when I'm expanding upon some of that, and I feel I could use both the Tarot or the Oracle, or maybe even both, with the Weavers, because there is for me, a really deep need for respect, time and energy in the way that I work with the Weavers, in the rituals and how long that I spend with each one. There is something otherworldly, there are liminal expressions, just things that the Somnia deck and also its archetypal oracle friend will speak to beautifully. Again, art styles very, very different. I might, I guess, notice some colour play, but really I wouldn't be looking for any of that with these two, because I'll have a Weaver out, which I have already in my altar space, and then I'm not really going to have the cards together. So I know that seems strange to show in a pairings video, but pairings aren't always about just having decks out together on the table for me. It's actually about expanded long form work. And when I work with a weaver, when I work with an animal through animal gnosis, sometimes when I work with a different archetypal expression, one of the fallen angels, I will work with one for a longer period of time and I'll have their expression out and up. And what I'm looking for then is decks that I feel that open the portal of communication and make sense with the type of work and approach that I'm doing with those particular spirits, expressions, again, archetypes, and either meeting the work or perhaps the theme shift between one from the other. So I just wanted to add that in there. That is all of the tarot pairings. I have 4 more to pair with the Oracle deck. I really wanted to give the Oracle its time to shine with other decks as well. As I say, you might not get both, and also I don't really have too many like exclusive pairings. I mean, even this is just a nice way to flesh out what my go-tos would be. This might seem like a weird choice. So this is the Wild Unknown, one of the editions. You can get a mass market one. But the Wild Unknown is one of my long time go-to, tried and tested, everything decks. Speaks to a part of me on like a core level and kind of reverberates through me both energetically but also expresses itself in a language that feels really familiar, which is why I was so drawn to the Somnia photography, because in a very different way they do the same thing in the way that I relate to them. They feel personal, they feel so personal. It's almost gets into like a very indulgent self-focus, like, oh, these are for me. Obviously, they're not just made for me, but it's that connection, you know. And I feel very lucky because I think that sometimes with the slew of decks out there, people get caught searching for those. And whilst I enjoy bringing new decks in, obviously, I do have those kind of key decks. Adding to them with this, fantastic. But anyway, let's get into that. Although I can already see the Seeker for the Son of Cups, which would be our Knight. And this does give me some Knight energy. They're clearly trying to do something, although it looks like quite the experience, actually. I like the play between water, which is not always a given in the Oracle, actually, but is quite possible. And then here with the strike of the 8 of Wands really adds to that energy again. Shifting through, because this is really agitating my cough. I've been talking for a while. I love that the Alchemist here is a shadowy figure and it feels like it's actually mirroring the tree in the 6 of Cups. And we have the Daughter of Cups as well. For me, these are pure vibes and sheer readability. Also, look at these tones very subtly. I'm not sure if it will come through on camera, but we have greenish, bluish turquoise into purple lines behind the Queen of Pentacles, and then we've got the 5 of Pentacles. Now if you're curious, I can give you a really quick sampling of the guidebook. So the keywords here are omens, divination, foresight, natural, connection, observation, and decryption. I wonder if there was meant to be a break in between those two as well. But anyway, in a secluded valley, we approach the peculiar domain of the Augur, who sits blindfolded in a quiet communion with the unseen forces at play. Though their appearance is enigmatic, there is an undeniable gravity to their presence that draws us forward. We seek him not for vague assurances, but for a clear vision of what lies ahead. Seated before us, the Augur holds a black umbrella raised towards the heavens, redirecting the relentless rain above into his basin. Unmoving and deliberate, the Augur transforms the chaos of the rainstorm into a ritual of meaning. Each droplet contributes to a larger message waiting to be revealed. Through his unusual form of alchemy, the Augur channels the elements into tangible signs, interpreting their patterns with precision. The blindfold signifies his detachment from superficial distractions, enabling him to focus on deeper truths. His insights are practical and rooted in the interplay of forces that govern from beyond the material world. In this stillness, he becomes a vessel of understanding, offering foresight to those who approach with questions of what might manifest in the future. And then underneath it says, as a little kind of invitation, take time to ponder recent events and look for repeating themes or symbols. A lovely amount of information in that one. It is longer than some of the others, so going to be a variety. Also, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So what we have here, and you could go back to simply the keywords and the invitation, which is omens, sort of leaning out to me. I feel like it wants to say natural foresight instead of foresight natural. So that's what we're going to say. Connection, observation, take time to ponder recent events and look for repeating themes or symbols, which is going to really help us with that shift of what they were talking about in terms of sort of going beyond the material world and the absolute pain of what is going on in that moment, to think beyond it, to nurture and foster something perhaps more helpful, conducive to the experience that we are currently finding ourselves stuck within. That's a really quick example and a takeaway. I am really liking these two together. The artwork is definitely an odd selection, but I don't mind it at all. Actually, I like the fact that these two have both got like a sky here. Sorry, I keep coughing and having to stop. And then the idea of more going on below the surface. And so the Four Swords here sort of go into these, they could be these, or this kind of ominous figure back here in the Revenant. The Revenant could be the Hanged Man facet as well. And then we've got the Lamb as this being here. There's a lot to play with if you can get beyond the contrast of what you're seeing visually, you know? I wonder if the Mare is short for the Nightmare, just based on the fact how this figure's holding their head. And then it's really interesting because the Four of Cups, when we have these four candles here, which feel quite stable, they're the foundation of the bed, which is meant to be, you know, a safe space. But of course the Nightmare, if that's even what it means, which I should have probably checked, is that something else is being brought into the equation which has caused it to topple. It's caused something else to occur that could feel very tower-like. Remembering that the tower can be quite mundane in its presence and it doesn't always present in the most obvious capacities. And just for the curious, it is in fact, or from what it sounds like, the Nightmare, because it says she is the Mare, the spirit of nightmares and sleep paralysis, a presence that stifles the conscious mind in the dark hours of the night. I'll be honest, I am unsure about these other three tarot pairings. This is the Hyde Tarot. I can't tell you for why. I think my initial reasoning was that there is a kind of oracle aspect to this where it focuses in so innately on particular things, symbols, expressions, that sometimes it can collude with other decks and it gets noisy in a way that I don't find helpful. And I've tried to pair it quite a few times and not had success, although I can read with multiple cards from the Hyde Tarot. But I don't know, see that? I like that. We've got the Nine of Swords, the Ensnared, and the Knight of Pentacles. But also I'm drawn to the idea of like a painting and a disguise and how that speaks to the expression of being ensnared. Like, are we really? The Captor between the Fool and the Queen of Wands. I do like how these two are looking at each other and into the middle, and then these two figures, whilst either blindfolded or hooded, are also facing towards each other. Who's the captor and who's the captee? The ensnared, the captor, the escape artist. You can see why the creator has themed and grouped them together, but quite honestly, behind the scenes, it's been a little bit challenging finding the cards quickly in the guidebook. It could just be me though. I don't know, I'm struggling with the contents page or whatever, because the information is there. The Three of Swords and the Three of Wands coming together for the escape artist. That's clever, especially because I feel like foxes are a wonderful expression of adaptability, camouflage, and therefore escape artists. And then the Three of Swords is about how we flex that part of our mind and the narrative as to whether we can, I guess, support ourselves in our pursuit to come together and escape. You know, it's kind of working. It's taking longer, I guess, is what I want to say. Like, it's a little bit distracting, but not massively. See, as soon as I saw the Reckoning, I saw this piece of what I think is just a bleed in the background, but it looks like lightning, and I'm not mad at it, which is some really strong energy, especially between the thistle and the rabbit, because there's quite a contrast between how they are expressed in folklore and sort of like the human lenses expression of them. I think these are workable together, actually. I'm kind of surprised. Now, it is taking more of that time. I think it's worth it. Look, the Ten of Pentacles, I nearly said of stone, and the idea of like composure. Look at how composed they are. In between the Five of Wands and the fire around, like you can see almost the energetic rage and friction building around this goat. And here, this part of the table is just completely ablaze. I think I'm sold. I would be curious what you think on this one in particular. This next pairing is another don't ask too many questions, let's see what happens. It's like a trust exercise. The Marigold Tarot is one that I do work with similar themes, although again it feels quite open in terms of what I choose to approach it with, but I also thought it would bring a certain level of spaciousness, which you do get sort of from the Wild Unknown as well, but perhaps even more so in this deck, that would support really focusing in on these as archetypes and concepts in like a bigger way. And again, for those who perhaps are coming to this video for the first time ever, this is a really nice way to set them up and try them out. But I don't solely just read this 2-in-1 capacity all of the time. There are an absolute myriad of ways that I would bring these decks together, and there would probably be more tarot cards in this instance, but still, I feel like still the one oracle card. We shall see. I think in reality I would actually need more time to work with them. What I'm noticing about the recovery here is it's sort of bringing to mind the Tower from the Somnia Tarot, but instead the fire's now contained within it. It's not burning atop anymore. So there's the idea of containment being the first step to recovery. And so perhaps the indulgencies of the devil, because I still think there's a lot that can be amazing and useful and necessary in this archetype, but perhaps our time has come with that. And so as not to go into a place where we lose ourselves to something and we become ignorant of it, and we're allowing it to just, you know, if it was a fire, take out everything in sight, don't care, sort of trying to really channel ignorance is bliss, but when we're not actually ignorant. And also having the strength to move into recovery, because the containment period is incredibly confronting. It's so freaking confronting. So actually, again, the visuals of the Marigold Tarot, they are giving me the space to sort of, not in a horrible way, because to say to ignore them is not fair, because I love this. The aesthetic of this deck is an absolute yes for me, but they're just allowing me to focus more in on the meaning in this instance and less of that visual play that I perhaps do at other points. The storytelling is still there, it's just the way that I'm coming to it is different, because of course the foundational knowledge that I have about all of these things is always going to infuse the way I read. So then what I try and show you are sort of, I guess, the additional top layers and how they might change out for each other, and some take focus over others, which I think is a really fun way of exploring how someone might read in pairings, even though you're really only getting like the most minuscule expression of these. I do love sharing readings in practice. It is quite an undertaking. I tend to do them on Patreon therefore, but also when I have done discussions like that on YouTube, they are chronically underwatched, under-engaged with, so it does kind of end up feeling like a waste of energy. I know this is a one-off because the Bastion obviously has a particular vibe with it, but as if this isn't a mood. Visually here, there is a centering of light. So this is one where, again, the visuals sort of taken me perhaps a little bit more. Oh, the drift. The fact that they are submerged in something that, quite frankly, looks like it shouldn't be there. You know, you ideally don't want a hole in your floorboards and your bed to have literally sunk into it. And then you can see here the ship looks like it's having its own tower moment in the background, and the water's actually spilling from the picture out into reality, causing these two to collide, you know, these two parts of our worlds. And we are in our thought, in our narrative, in our communicative space in the Page of Swords, and then the Tower just bringing that shake up and absolute crumbling. Well, these are a yes, at least for now. There's not such a demand as there was with the Hyde Tarot. So certainly depending on the energy and where I'm at any one time, to me the Wild Unknown Tarot and this one, or the Somnia, were faster, more natural, accessible pairings, whereas that Hyde Tarot one was just giving a bit of something extra, which wasn't bad, it was just different. This is the final pairing, and I'm already getting a giant no from it, but I thought we would embrace it, because we're at the end. We've seen a lot of yeses. Did I say this was the Lioness Oracle Tarot? Can you tell I've been filming for a while? Oh, severance between the lovers, though. Oh, that hits. That's a very visual. That'll be interesting if these read really well together, because visually I don't like them. Importantly, I love both of these decks, by the way. And the reason that I pulled the Lioness Oracle Tarot out is because it's one of the few other photography-based decks I have, or photography-based collage, because I guess technically they're different. This deck is hard for me to handle, so it gets less use, but also it I tend to use the Lioness Oracle Tarot now when I'm working with Freya. I have to say, like, the visuals, which, as I've said to you, I could really easily ignore or get on board with in a different way when it was the Hyde or the Wild Unknown. For some reason, even though they're quite abstract, peculiar, surreal, there's something about them that still feel jarring. Obviously, I could read them together, but in terms of like the kind of hit that I like to get from my readings energetically, it's not doing it the rest of the time. Whereas actually now I'm looking at this with this and thinking about the concept of archetypes as a whole, I'm thinking that the Lioness Oracle Tarot would work really well with the Wild Unknown archetypes. How have I not tried those two together? Both collage, both very different approaches, both quite colourful as well. I feel like they're going to give me less of that internal twitch that I seem to have a difficulty expressing. It's like a feeling that I can't verbalise fully. Because again, like a few of these cards, this one, I'm like, yes, okay, I can just about deal with that. And I know that the concepts make sense to each other, because if I was to just write down on a piece of paper, sorry, let's change this. 2 of Wands, exposure, Ace of Wands, away with it. I really don't like the visuals of 2 decks that I absolutely adore the visuals of individually, just not together. Well, I'm not surprised, I have to say. Because it was kind of a reach when I pulled it out. I had even more out. I had like the Witch Sister out, the Tarot of Vampires. Again, I feel like they are workable, but they just, even just getting them out of the box and seeing them next to it, I was like, nah. I think my favourite was still the Wild Unknown, but I really like the Marigold Tarot with it as well. And of course the Somnia is just a given. So there you have it, folks. We have gone through a lot together. I am very much done. So I have very little to say right now other than thank you for hanging out with me. And yeah, this has been a bit of an exploration and play with the Revised Somnia Tarot and its newest counterpart, the Somnia Oracle. Really impressed with the Oracle as a whole. Really quite enjoying some of the versatility that this version will offer me. It's still not a stolen favourite, but it is easier to handle, so we shall see. Let me know your thoughts. Are you getting a copy? Is this photography kind of your thing? If you have experiences with sleep paralysis, then let me know. I actually did a deep dive with the original Somnia Tarot over on Patreon, discussing a little bit more about my experience with that stuff and just kind of contextualising it, I guess. But yeah, I'm always interested to hear other people's experiences, and I will see you all again soon. Bye.